This session is It's Alive animation techniques that bring to life SPFx and list formatting SharePoint solutions. So we're going to discuss a lot of fun opportunities to take advantage of interacting with your users, creating a rich feature set within your solutions of SharePoint and list formatting. My name is David Warner. For those that don't know me, I'm a Microsoft MVP, PNP team member, work for Catapult Systems. A big sports fan, hockey, ice hockey, and American football. As if you couldn't tell from the helmets behind me here. It's not a fake team's background, but real. Big sports fan, but even bigger fan of the community. So please don't hesitate to reach out and collaborate with me. I'd love to work with everybody in the community. That's my Twitter and my email. So please don't let this be the only time that we interact. It's going to be a fun session, a little spooky. If you're a Frankenstein or young Frankenstein fan, we're going to have a lot of fun today. And I couldn't do this session without my co-presenter, Hugo Bernier. Hugo?
Hi, everyone. My name is Hugo Bernier. I am also a MVP. Actually, no, I guess I'm a former MVP now because I just recently joined Microsoft. I'm also a member of the Patterns and Practices team, and I'm the opposite of David. I don't like football or any sports. I mean, look at me. And my background here is actually a fake background. My office is actually really clean in real life. But we're looking forward to have fun today. David, back to you.
Thanks, Hugo. So let's talk about the agenda for the session. We're going to talk about some reasons for animation to begin with. We don't want them just to be gratuitous or for no specific purpose other than just to annoy or think that we're doing something cool. There's actually a very concrete use case for when and where and how you should use animations. And Hugo's going to walk us through that. And then we're going to go through a trifecta of techniques. It's going to be no code, low code, and then what else? Mo code, some more code. So we want to see that mo code technique. And then we're going to really discuss how to wrap all that together to bring your creations to life. Now, we want to have fun. If you're not familiar with the original Young Frankenstein movie, that's what this session is factored after and fashioned after. So Hugo and I are not we're not apart from being able to make fun of ourselves. We're not above that. So we love to have fun. So let's kick it off and say, what is it that is the most often requested feature within SharePoint? Well, that's, can you make SharePoint not look like SharePoint? Now, this was really a request that kind of was more prominent in Classic. As we moved to Modern, things did get better. They started to look better. They were responsive out of the box. But now we all kind of feel like we've got the same look and feel within our solution. We've got the header and the footer, and all the solutions tend to have that same look and feel. We're not overwriting a master page anymore or completely changing the pixel 00 to the other end of our screen. So we still want to try to find ways in which we can enhance our experience, our user's experience, and animation is that way. So who is this session for today? Well, who could use these techniques? Power users. So if you're not a developer, if you're a power user and you can write JSON, or you're comfortable within a small little scripting area, which we'll show in demos, this is a techniques for you. If you're a UI designer and you're looking for ways in which you can imply or tell your developers to create interactive experiences within SharePoint, these are techniques for you. And if you're a full-on SPFx developer, well, no doubt these are techniques for you. So I am going to hand the screen share over to Hugo, who's going to walk us through how animations enhance user experience.
Wonderful, thank you. If we can switch to my slide share, please.
Yeah, you should, down at the bottom, you should be able to just share your.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so let's actually use a real life example. So this is the actual countdown web part that's available in SharePoint, and it counts down to a timeline or a deadline. Now, Microsoft could have just displayed the date and time and be done with it, but by simply making it count down to the deadline, it actually brings your attention to it. It conveys that the deadline's approaching, and it brings a sense of urgency to the event. And you might say that's not even using animation, but you know what? It's really just changing the time. And you'd be right. But your eye perceives the change on the page, and it brings your attention to it. And that's what we're trying to do with micro animations, is to convey information in a very subtle way without being distracting. So let's talk about the things or the reasons why we would want to use animations. Well, the first thing is, as a user, the problem I have is I want to know when an action is done. Well, one of the ways that you would use animation is by showing when the action is done by just kind of changing something, changing a button to show that, yes, I understand that you clicked on this and it actually did work. The other problem that we're trying to solve is that the user wants to know that an action is in progress. So I just clicked on something and you reacted to that, but now I want to see that something is happening, and maybe something will take a bit longer to react. So show me that there's an operation in progress. The other problem that we're trying to solve with microanimation is I want to understand how long something will take. And so we can actually do that by showing some visualizations, right? You see that all the time with the boring progress bar, but there's other ways that you could do this. And again, what we're trying to do with microanimations is introduce delight. In this case here, we're saying there's a change from day to night, and kind of the landscape is changing a little bit. That's one way to illustrate that there's a progress happening. Sometimes we want our users to see, well, we always want our users to see the key things first, but that's the challenge that our users have. They want to know what they should focus on. So in the example we're showing here, we're boiling down the information on what's the most important. Is it going to be sunny, cloudy, rainy, or snowy? It doesn't matter. Like, we actually show you with that little animation what the essential information is. And then all the other stuff, like the actual temperature and whether it's in Celsius or Fahrenheit, it doesn't really matter. If the user wants to see that information, they will focus on it. And that's a concept where we call this progressive disclosure, or progressively disclose or show more information as the user indicates they want to see it. And then the other way that we want things or animations to help is by making interactions feel natural. So notice how when we move the list in this animation here, the objects on the list move almost as if those objects were on a conveyor belt. And when we move that conveyor belt, the objects on that conveyor belt are moving along. So by making things feel more natural, users feel that the application is more instinctive because it works like things in real life, and therefore they're more user-friendly. And if you've ever seen children use tablets and things like that, they'll have a tendency to just do actions that they're natural, they're just comfortable with. I want to move something, I want to dismiss something, I'll just kind of swat it away. So that's what we're trying to do here, is introduce that same sense of I'm using something that I'm familiar with to animate. All right. One of the other things that we're trying to do here is we're trying to show excitement, right? So if the screen is boring, sometimes you just want to create an incentive for people to do the right thing. So let's say you have a task that you want your users to do more frequently, but they just don't want to do it because it's painful. Well, by adding a little bit of animation, you can actually introduce some delight and make people do things that they don't want to do. There's a reason why there's games like Angry Bird and Candy Crush, why they're so popular. Even though they're still huge waste of time, at least for me, they do delight the users and they make them want to continue playing. So you can use microanimations to do the same. All right. So let's talk about some guidelines. If you're going to do animations, you can't just randomly throw things, and that might be what my first instinct was when I started doing animations, but there are a few rules. The first thing is consider how often your user will see the animation. The first time they'll see the animation, it might seem novel, it might seem delightful. However, novel and delightful can eventually become an annoyance after a while. So just be careful about that. The other thing to consider is how long should you make your animation last? If it's too fast, people might not notice it. Same thing can happen if the animation takes too long. So let's actually dig in a little bit deeper on those animations. It turns out there's an optimal speed for creating animations. Anything below 100 milliseconds will appear instant to users. It takes about 150 milliseconds to 350 milliseconds for users to understand that there's an animation happening. So if you make your animation between about 200 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds, you're ensuring that your users will actually notice the animation and that it will register. So that's just if you just need to remember 200 to 500 millisecond, that's the ultimate time. If you make it longer, it actually seems sluggish. And if you make it shorter, people might not notice that there's an animation happening. The speed of the animation can also affect the perceived performance. So slower animations can lead to users thinking the system is slow as well. Animations can actually be used to hide delays, and by keeping the users engaged and give a perceived performance increase. Loading animations can keep the users occupied with visual feedback, and as a result, the users actually perceive that they waited a shorter time. The number of cycles, the number of times that we repeat the same animation, can also increase the perceived speed. Now, this is not the same thing as what I was talking about earlier, where we said how often people see the animation. This is, the number of times that we repeat that same animation within one animation because it's part of a repeating movie. So an example of this is Facebook has a skeleton, what they call skeleton content. So there's just gray boxes that represent text, and it actually animates when it loads. It's actually very elegant, and probably most of you have never really noticed it because it is so subtle. But what it does, it actually makes the page look faster than it really is. And there's a company called VGet, they did a study, and they found that people would actually rather wait longer for branded animations over the generic ones. So if you have to do something that will take a long time, take the time to just do something that will entertain your users. The other thing to consider is accessibility. People can get sick with animations. That's why since iOS 7, you've had the option to turn off the parallax effect, right? Where the background is actually going at a slightly different speed than the foreground. Animations should always be triggered by the user. They're less likely to catch the users off guard. No big autoplay animation. Otherwise, again, that might throw off some users. So if people with motion sickness can actually indicate that they want to use motion or they don't want to use motion. And you can actually use CSS to automatically hide or show animation based on that user's preference without having to add any code. So here's an animation here that makes something pulse every 1 second. Now that's CSS that a lot of us would use. But if I wanted to actually just query the system to say, does this user prefer not to have animations or have a reduced motion animation, all you need to do is just add the @media query here and say, does this user prefer reduced motion? And then in this case, what I'm doing is instead of having a repeating, pulsating 1 second animation, I'm just dissolving the animation here. So that's all you need to do here. And that way, if your animation is not relevant, you can actually even just not use it at all. Here's an example of a real website that I just love this website, by the way. But if you look at this website, it's almost sickening, right? There's so much stuff going on, so much information. You just don't know where to look. That's probably the opposite of what you want to do with your animations. And I do love this website, so please don't take this as me taking it down or anything. But again, it's not our intended goal here. Let's use an actual example. This is a web part that I built a long time ago, it feels like, where it allows the users to actually upload a photo ID, and it will call an Azure AD web service to detect, or not Azure AD, Azure Web Service, cognitive service, to detect whether the user is uploading inappropriate picture, right? A dirty picture or a picture that's not a passport picture or a picture of their kids or whatever. It'll automatically detect that and it'll report that. So let's look at what happens when I do this call. And so one thing you have to understand here, there you go. It's actually kind of slow, right? Because it's calling Azure, it's analyzing the picture, and then it's coming back and it's telling you, yes, this is a good picture. There's only one face. no adult, no racy, no gory, and all that stuff. Now, let's take that exact same web part, and let's actually add some animation. So I'm using a better looking person here as a test subject. We'll actually go submit the picture. But now what we've done is we've added a little bar that scans up and down as we're scanning. And you'll notice, again, we didn't change the amount of time that we had to make the query, but it actually felt faster because we were distracting you. But still, it felt a little sluggish because that bar was so slow at moving across. Let's see what happens when we make the bar move faster and we introduce other animations. So again, we'll use me as a subject. I will submit the picture. Now the bar is moving a lot faster, and I've actually just detected the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And right away, the response comes back. Now, if you actually timed the response for each one of those web parts, you would see that it's exact same time for each one of them, but it felt a lot shorter because of the animation. And that's really some of the tricks that we'll be showing you today. All right. So David, how do you feel about doing some no-code techniques for us?
Absolutely. Let's dive in and look at some no-code techniques. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so when we think about no code as software developers or technologists, it sort of feels like it's a little bit of a lie. And the truth is, it is. There is nothing that encompasses absolutely no code at all. But what could we classify as no code in the sense of animation? Well, that could be copy and paste. If you can copy and paste, then you can put into practice some of these no code techniques that we're going to talk about today. So let's dive into some demos and talk about how you can take advantage of no code techniques and opportunities. We're going to begin with a list. Now, what we're looking at is a list within SharePoint. And this is nothing more than just simply a list that we're looking at here. We can see that we're in a list there, right? So there's no magic going on here. This is a list within a SharePoint site. We are using list formatting, right? So we've associated a list formatting definition to this collection. So if I were to go from my photo view here to all items, we see there's really nothing going on here that isn't very familiar to us as SharePoint users. But what we've assigned here is a view formatting definition. So if I were to say format current view, then we can see there's some JSON here. And you may or may not be familiar. We don't want you to get overwhelmed if this is new to you, because what you're going to be empowered to do by the end of the session is to literally take examples and samples that we're going to supply you with and copy and paste them into scenarios like we're going to demonstrate. So this is how it's working behind the scenes. But on this page within the list, well, there's really not a whole lot you can do other than that view formatting definition. But if you put the web part, the list web part, on an actual page, which is what I've done here, we're sitting on an actual page now, as you can see, and we've got the list web part that's been added to the page. And if we edit that, it's doing nothing but looking at some of the views that are incorporating that Polaroid-like experience, which is pretty nice. Now, what you can do on a page is you can add additional web parts that could enhance this list web part that we have access to out of the box. One of those web parts is the enhanced list formatting web part. Now, this is a patterns and practices web part. And what this does is it gives you the ability to inject CSS onto this page. And now when we do that, you may think, hold on, wait a second. Typically, it's not recommended that you inject CSS, and you'd be right. But in this case, I created the list formatting definition for our list, which means that we own that HTML. We're not looking to override HTML up here in the header or down here in the footer or in the comments section or some other area of the page that we technically don't own the HTML for. We do own the HTML for this list formatting definition. So we provide a little bit of a warning here, kind of like when you get into a car and you turn your GPS on, it tells you not to use it while you're driving. In this case, this is a great power comes great responsibility web part. You can use it to do evil things, but you can also use it to do heroic things, which is what we're going to display in this session. But if you misuse it, these are some of the results you're going to have to live with. Loss of styles, broken styles. People are going to say SharePoint's broken. It's going to result in tears and nightmares and blue screens of death. And we don't want any of that for you. So make sure you use this responsibly. It's a powerful web part. But what it allows you to do is to include CSS here. Now, you could edit the CSS in the panel. You could expand the CSS panel to have a more rich, wider experience to add your CSS. Now, what we're going to do is, and I'm just going to bring over VS Code here and show you, I've got a collection of 3 different CSS files that I'm going to copy and paste from. Now, these are not really any magic. It's just basic CSS that utilizes animation techniques. And we're going to look at how we can override that list experience on a page by using nothing more than CSS. We're talking 0 JavaScript, 100% CSS and HTML. So I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to hit save, and notice what happened. The first reaction is you'll notice that the Polaroids went a little askew to one another. So now it looks a little more natural on the page, as if they had been just scattered on the page in a more realistic scenario as in real life. But if I hover over it, now I'm able to bring attention to an individual Polaroid. In the action that Hugo described, it's user-driven. It's not just happening on its own through an animation that's timed. I have to hover over each one of these to engage and bring it a little closer to the screen or to my view. Well, what else could we do? Could we change and enhance that a little bit more? Yes, I'm going to go into this web part. I'm going to remove that CSS and replace it with some more CSS. And now you'll see what's happened is a couple of things. Each of the Polaroids has turned black and white. But in addition to that, I've also changed the font. So now, if you've ever used a Polaroid, you know, the historical use cases, you'd write your name on it or write a message on it. Now we're using a cursive font to make it look a little bit more natural. Again, we're mimicking real life here. Why did it go black and white? Well, now when I hover over the individual Polaroid, I can color shift from black and white to color, which is going to prominently bring attention to the item that I'm hovering over even more and stand out from the others in a greater way. All right. But wait, there's more. One more thing we could do in this sense with just pure CSS. I'm going to remove that and paste in some new CSS. And you'll notice what's happened is we've added a little heart. Now, this is not necessarily tied to any programmatic logic in this demo, but it could be. So imagine if it were, well, I can now hover over it. I can see bows coming to the forefront, turns to a color. And when I hover over that heart, I get a little bit of a sprite animation. And that's happening just by me hovering over the heart into a animated sprite. And so I could, of course, add additional functionality to that in another scenario if I wanted to, which we'll talk about in a moment. But everything you see here is done with 100% CSS, technically zero programming. CSS is debatably not really programming, but it is a cascading style sheet. So you are styling how your page looks. And with that styling comes the ability to animate based on certain things occurring, such as hover state. Right? We see those two things there. So what did we use? What are the resources available to you as a no-code implementer of this, maker? Well, list formatting samples are available to you. We talked about just being able to copy and paste. If you go to aka.ms/list-formatting, that is going to give you access to a whole host of list formatting definitions that you can use for free and modify to your heart's content. The other item we used was the list formatting enhancer web part. That is also available for free from the Patterns of Practices community and can be deployed into your tenant for free and dropped onto a page just like you saw me drop it and used as simply as that. All right, so let's take it a step further now. Let's look at low-code techniques. Well, what is low-code? Low-code is a little bit more, it's about user interactive driven triggers, right? So it's going to think about clicking. We're going to click on something and we're going to see an effect. Now that's going to require a little bit more than HTML and CSS. It's going to require some JavaScript, but we're not talking about SPFx here. We're talking about simple usage of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's take a look at a demo of what that could be. I'm going to go back to the browser and I'm going to go to my low code page here. Now this looks very similar to what we had just looked at, but it is a different web part actually. So if I edit this web part, it's actually the content query web part. Now this is not an out of the box. This is a community opportunity solution that you can have access to for free. If you're familiar with the classic world of SharePoint, you might remember the old content query web part that used XSL was a little hard to work with. Well, now within the modern world, the modern React content query web part utilizes handlebar templates. Those handlebar templates allow you to include and identify and structure your solution using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, we're not going to get deep into the code because we don't want you to get overwhelmed by that, but just know that what's driving this solution in this low-code opportunity behind the scenes is nothing more than HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. It uses the handlebars construct to loop through the list data, but it's extremely simple to use. And it's really nothing more than HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, how is this improved upon above and beyond no code? What makes it low code? Well, it's that JavaScript, right? It's the ability to have modified the web part using a technique. So what does that mean? How does that work for us? Well, now you see when I hover over that, we get the same experience that we did within the no code, and I can hover over my heart. We see that's the same, but watch what happens when I click. Now, you obviously won't see my little finger here clicking on the mouse, but when I clicked on the heart, now look what's happening. We see a persistent effect, and even when I remove the hover, that heartbeat still occurs. Now, as Hugo had mentioned in the guidelines, we wouldn't want something like this to go on forever. Maybe a couple of beats, because look what happens when I click on each one of these. And they all start beating differently, and our eyes start kind of twitching, right? Where do we look? I'm not sure where to focus. It gets a little annoying. We're letting it animate infinitely here for purposes of the demo. But you can see now we're given this opportunity to interact. Now, this is where we could tie this to an API behind the scenes. Maybe this favorites these people within Graph or within our AD or in a list or something like that. And so when you return to this page in the future, they're already read, right? Something like that, because you're able to engage with a little bit more functionality in this case. But wait, there's more. Using the exact same construct, we're using a content query web part here, right? And we're using a handlebars template right here that is nothing more than HTML, and using some JavaScript along with jQuery. And there's better libraries to use the jQuery, but it is one of the more popular. So we just want to show that it could be used. We are able to now hover over and add additional information. So notice what I'm doing is I'm adding additional information with this animation technique. If you'd like to include information about users, but in a passive way, in a way that your users choose when they learn more about the user, see what we're doing here is we're zooming into the photo, and then we're displaying information about the member on hover. Now I can still interact with the heart, right? I could make the follow on Twitter a button that's going to open up maybe a new tab and take you to their Twitter account and allow you to follow them. And when I go off of the hover, the heartbeat still persists, right? Now, this is all just using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, but by using this animation technique, we're able to not overwhelm the user when they first load the page. They make the decision when they want to see the additional information, and we show it in a pleasant way, right? We're not just flipping it really quickly. We're actually using a soft zoom to kind of transpose the information from their photograph to the additional information about the user. Again, just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, what are the resources available to you for this technique? Well, that modern React content query web part is again available for free, aka.ms/SPFx-web part. You can download it. It is available for on-prem and online. And the newest version, in fact, will allow you to integrate the Microsoft Graph Toolkit components, which is even better. If you'd like to learn more about that, reach out to Hugo and I. We can help you out there. Now, what about some of those animation techniques you saw, implementing them within CSS? We didn't really dive deep into that because we want you to be excited about what can be done and how easy it can be done. One of the resources we use is called Animista.net. Now, this is a website that will allow you to go using a wizard-like experience, define the animation you want, and it will give you the CSS that all you then need to do is copy and paste into your solution, maybe change the class names, but super, super, super powerful. All right, so we've covered no code, we've covered low code.
I think we lost your audio there, David. Well, good thing you were done presenting. So if we can switch to my screen, if you don't mind. So let's talk about what is MoCode. So MoCode, so far, everything we've done is actually using CSS, HTML, and a little bit of JavaScript. MoCode is really adding things like if I wanted to do SharePoint Framework development, or if I wanted to, instead of using SharePoint Framework, I wanted to add advanced animation frameworks. Because all the animations we've done so far were based on just some samples we found on the internet. But what if I wanted to find like a fancy library that allows me to do 3D animations or drag and drop animations or things like that? There are libraries that we can use, some that are free, some that are you have to pay for. So that's, to me, is when we start talking about MoCode, right? Because we're adding libraries and things like that. The other thing to consider is like physics-driven animations. So things like if I wanted to do, gravity or bouncing or things like that. So any of those things are things that we would add more code, and it's probably not something you want to start coding in a HTML editor on the web base on a web browser. You want to probably use something like Visual Studio Code or something like that. So let's actually do a little demo. Before we do, I wanted to show you, David was talking about Animista, but I think due to audio difficulties, he was not able to actually share that with you. So Animista is animista.net. So there's a little site here where you can go, you can find some cool animations. There's all sorts of animations with all sorts of settings and things like that for all sorts of things. The cool thing is when you find the animation you want, and I would never use this animation, by the way, because it's repeating. But you go to the animation, you can actually copy the CSS and the keyframes for it and put that in there. And that's mostly what David and I did for our animations. But for this demo, what I'm going to show you is something that comes from Greensock. Now, Greensock is one of those libraries that allows you to you insert it in your project, and it actually allows you to do a lot of really crazy animations. I happen to have found the sample here, which is a sortable grid. So if you actually look at using a fixed style grid, you can move the grid around and reorder things. So I started thinking, like we have this Polaroid animation that we've already done, and we have a list of people. So what if I was trying to create, let's say, let's rank these people, or let's actually create a queue where I want to manage, the order in which I want these people to approve a document or something. And that's what I did. I took this exact sample, which has some CSS built in and some JavaScript. And the one thing that this sample does is it actually includes the Greensock library, and I've added that to my code. So here, this should look familiar because this is the same thing that David showed you. But let's say here, so some of my favorite people are Emily, April, Bo, Katie, right? I want to move stuff around. And David, you're always my favorite, so I'm going to keep you at the top here. But, and Emily and April take turns being my favorite. So I can just move them around. But you can imagine here that using this code, I could actually make it now go right back to a service. And the one thing I have to say is David and I have been doing these animations for a while, and we've been playing with these web parts for a while. Every single time that I present these web parts, I kind of have fun they're fun to play with, they're interactive, and that's really what you want. You want your users to be able to enjoy themselves when they're using something that's otherwise boring. But let me show you how I did this. Now, for the purpose of time, we decided not to do an SPFx web part for here because we would have had to go and load up a whole web part and everything. I actually cheated and I actually used the same idea that David did before, where he actually he used the content query web part with a handlebar template. And the handlebar template is the exact same handlebar template that he used before to render this Polaroid style. But I have added the external scripts, and my external scripts, I added, of course, jQuery, and then I added the GSAP, which is the green sock animation package, and I added the draggable package, which comes with green sock animation. And finally, I added my own little Mo code, which is the stuff that is handling just moving stuff around. Where did I get the code again? I actually stole it all completely from here. So, I know we're going really quickly here. We only have 45 minutes in total, but this is actually a super easy way for us to actually integrate this animation. I could have actually added this again inside of a SharePoint Framework web part, and added the library as an NPM module if I wanted to. That would have worked as well. But the whole point is, again, we've used animation to introduce delight to our users and to make things fun to use. Now, some of the resources that we use for this are the modern content query web part, which is available at aka.ms/SPFX web parts. And we use greensock.com. Now, again, we're not sponsored by Greensock. We're not getting any consideration from them or anything like that. This is just a library that we love using. And I'm sure David can talk about the pricing, but I'm pretty sure you can use parts of it for free, and then if you start getting fancy, you have to pay for this package. The other resources that we use, and David, if you have audio, I'll give you the opportunity to talk. Can we hear you? Oh yeah,
I'm back. Here. Yeah, the software kind of bombed out on me for some reason. I had to refresh it. I thought the mic went wrong. So yeah, this kind of encompasses everything that we talked about today. So you've got the list formatting definitions, you've got the SPFX web parts that include both that list formatting enhancer web part as well as the content query web part. And then the resources that are available to you to make some of this stuff easier so you're not having to do it all by hand, Animista and GreenSock.
What else do we have?
Thank you. We have the thanks. We want to thank you all for the time. And as Hugo said, there's a lot of things that we're moving very fast on this. So if you would like to see more about it, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We can dive deeper into any one of these sections that you would like to see, maybe a little more wizardry behind the curtain and exactly how to implement it or how it was working or how we developed it.